She came to with a crushing weight on her chest, in the strange, muffled silence that only exists underground. At first, she could not separate dream from reality. Her mind tried to tell her she was trapped under a collapsed tent or pinned beneath gear. Something simple, something fixable. But the air told the truth. It was stale, thin, and tasted like soil. Each breath felt borrowed. She tried to lift her hands and felt them scrape against wood just inches above her face. Her pulse jumped. Her throat tightened. This was not an accident. The darkness pressed on her from all sides. It had weight. It had shape. She could almost hear it settling around her, grain by grain. When she tried to shift her legs, they barely moved. Her boots slid against more wood. There was no space, no light, no clue how deep she was buried. For a moment she stayed still, frozen by the sharp edge of fear, trying to figure out what part of her body hurt, what part was free, what part was working against her. The cold realization hit hard. She was alive in a place meant for the dead. Her first instinct was to shout, but the second she opened her mouth, she felt soil falling against her lips. The sound that escaped was small, swallowed instantly by the packed earth. She forced herself to stop. She knew she could not waste oxygen on panic. She counted her breaths, slow and steady, even though her heartbeat raced like it had its own survival plan. The air was already warm from her body heat. Every inhale felt thinner than the last. Her memories came back in flashes. Hands grabbing her. A shove. The sharp smell of gasoline. A truck engine rumbling somewhere behind her. A blindfold scraping her cheek. She had tried to track time, but they moved her without rhythm, without any hint of where they were headed. When the ground gave way under her, she thought they had pushed her into a ditch. She never expected to wake up sealed inside a wooden box. She tested the lid above her again, using her forearms to press upward. It did not budge. The boards creaked but held tight, reinforced with something heavy on top. She tried to bend her knees, tried to shift her hips, tried to find 1 inch of room she could use, but the coffin fit her body like it was measured for her. She could barely arch her back. Her shoulders scraped the sides. Only her fingers had space to move freely, and even that felt like a small mercy. Her training whispered reminders through the panic. Conserve breath. Control the body. Slow the pulse. Do not let fear steal air. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing, counting each inhale as if it could buy her another second. She tilted her face away from the settling dirt. She could feel soil sliding between the cracks in the lid, dusting her hair, slipping down her temple. She blinked it from her lashes and kept breathing. The weight on her chest grew heavier with each breath she drew. It was not real, not physical, but her body reacted as if it were. Her lungs stretched against the stale air. She listened for any sound above her, any clue that someone might still be nearby, but there was nothing. Only the faint vibration of her own heartbeat in her ears. She thought about the SEALs, her team, her people. She pictured their faces, not in desperation but in calculation. If they realized she was gone, they would find the trail. They always found the trail. She let that thought anchor her as she mapped her limited surroundings again, fingertips tracing the grooves in the wood, searching for a weakness. Every second mattered, but she had no idea how much oxygen she had left. She could not waste movement. She could not thrash. She could not scream. She needed to think. The box creaked as the soil settled more firmly around it. A fine line of dirt dripped beside her ear. She angled her head to avoid it, her breath now a quiet metronome in the tight darkness. She pressed her palms against the lid again, feeling for even the smallest shift, testing the wood for moisture, decay, or any place that might give under pressure. The boards were dry, solid, unforgiving. Her fingers moved along the seam where lid met frame, hunting for a flaw she could use, anything that would respond to touch instead of trapping it. She paused, listening to the tiny sounds inside her own body, measuring the space she had left, calculating what she could do with it without wasting the air. She had not yet used the first clue, did not arrive as a dramatic breakthrough. It slipped into their awareness the way most real clues do, small enough to ignore, sharp enough to bother the mind until someone paid attention. The SEALs had already realized she was missing. Her check-in window had passed. Her last known location was vague, the kind that offered more questions than answers. What they needed was a thread, even a thin one, to pull until it turned into a trail. That thread came from a scuff mark in the dirt behind an old hangar that was supposed to be empty. One of the team members saw it while sweeping the radius for anything that did not belong. Most people would have missed it. To anyone else, it looked like nothing more than a dragged heel or a boot pivot. But he crouched, looked closer, and noticed the angle. It was not the mark of someone turning. It was the mark of someone struggling. The pressure in the soil was uneven. The spacing was frantic. It told a story if you knew how to read it. And they did. He called it out, not with excitement, but with the steady tone they used when something mattered. From that moment, the energy shifted. They marked the spot, scanned for more, and began expanding their circle. They moved with precision, not haste, because haste caused mistakes and mistakes cost time. A few yards farther, another faint sign waited. A broken twig in a direction no one would walk on purpose. The fracture was fresh. The break was too sharp to be caused by wind or an animal. It had the clean snap of a hand brushing against it while being forced forward. They paced out the area, every footstep measured. Someone found tire impressions near the edge of the clearing. The pattern was strange. The treads were mismatched, one side newer than the other. Whoever took her was not driving a clean or well-maintained vehicle. They were moving with speed and urgency, maybe desperation. That alone told the team plenty. People who were calm planned better. People who panicked left evidence. The impressions crossed into an abandoned service road. The ground there was packed harder, tougher to read, but still offered something. A faint smear of oil. A few grains of dirt out of place. A single thread of fabric caught on a rusted metal post. One of the seals pulled it free and recognized the weave. It matched the material on her sleeve. They passed it between them for only a moment before sealing it. They did not need a lab to confirm what instinct already told them. She had been moved through here. Their pace quickened, still controlled but sharper. They worked like gears in a machine, each one turning the next. Drones lifted for aerial sweeps. GPS grids tightened. The team split briefly, not to cover more distance, but to cover it smarter. One group traced the road. Another searched for exit points where a vehicle might turn off into deeper terrain. The third scanned for signals, frequencies, anything they could intercept. The truck that took her was old, but old trucks still made noise. Noise could be followed. Then came the next clue, almost invisible. A thin line in the dust, curved and shallow. It looked like a tool scratch at first, but the angle was wrong for that. It was the type of curve made when someone dragged something metallic, something small, something she could have had on her. A belt buckle, a clip, a piece of gear she managed to loosen without alerting her captors. If she left it on purpose, it was a message. She was telling them to keep going. They examined the line, measured it, followed its arc until it pointed toward a narrow trail that veered off the road. The trail was half covered by weeds that had been crushed recently. The stalks bent inward, showing the direction of movement. They read the ground like others read text, translating each detail into a map. The weeds were flattened in pairs, spaced at the width of boot prints. That meant the men who took her were walking beside the vehicle at some point. That meant they were adjusting something. Maybe checking cargo, maybe arguing. Men who were confident did not stop to argue. Men who feared discovery did. Farther up, they found another print. Deeper, sharper. The kind made by someone carrying weight or dragging someone who fought back. It matched her boot. That single print shifted their urgency into conviction. She had been awake at some point. She had resisted. She had left a clear sign behind for them to find. It grounded the team, sharpened their focus, pushed them into the kind of silent determination that made them dangerous. The clues kept weaving together. A disturbed patch of earth where someone stumbled. A cigarette, but still warm enough to suggest recent presence. A loose bolt on the ground that likely fell from the truck, telling them the vehicle was rattling itself apart as it moved. All of it pointed in one direction, drawing a line through the wilderness that only a trained eye could follow. And with every piece they found, one truth became clearer. She was alive when they took her, and they were closing the gap inch by inch, sign by sign. until the trail would lead them to the place she had been hidden. The tactical trail did not come together in one clean sweep. It formed bit by bit as the team moved through the terrain with the kind of focus that cuts out everything except what matters. They had enough clues to build a direction, but direction alone meant nothing without structure. They needed a pattern, something they could test, track, and predict. Every step they took was measured. Every inch of ground was read with intent. They were not chasing shadows. They were reconstructing a path one detail at a time, using discipline more than instinct. They began by mapping the terrain in layers. The satellite feed gave them the wide picture, but wide pictures hide secrets. So they paired it with ground scans, thermal sweeps, and movement grids. One group identified choke points where a vehicle might slow down. Another focused on the natural corridors in the landscape: ravines, dry washes, tree lines thick enough to cover tire tracks. They marked each one with quiet precision, creating a network of possible routes. None of them wasted words. They spoke in short, clear notes, the kind you use when time is tight and mistakes shrink margins. As they advanced, the environment changed. The soil shifted from soft to packed, then to gravel. That meant fewer prints, fewer chances for luck. It meant relying on everything else: height of brush, displacement of rocks, broken grass stems, even the silence. Silence can tell you a lot when you know how to listen. The air held no echo of engines anymore, which meant the truck had been cut or slowed, likely somewhere ahead. A slowing vehicle leaves micro-indicators: a drip of coolant, a puff of dust hanging in the air longer than it should, a faint vibration in the ground. They watched for all of it. One of the SEALs crouched beside a cluster of mesquite and brushed a fingertip over the top layer of sand. He recognized the swirling pattern. A tire had passed through, but not recently. Hours old. The wind had softened the edges, but not erased them. That told them the truck had pushed deeper into the brush, off the main route. No one takes a rough off-road path unless they are hiding something or someone. They adjusted their grid and tightened their formation, moving with the kind of quiet confidence built from years of reading terrain like a second language. The tactical picture sharpened when they discovered a set of tracks running parallel to the original route. 3 men, one heavier than the others. Their spacing suggested agitation. The heavier man paused often, sinking deeper into the dirt each time. That pattern hinted at hesitation or argument. Both were good for the team. People who argue slow down. People who hesitate leave traces. They followed the tracks until they faded into rocky ground, then used thermal imaging to pick up residual heat in disturbed stones. Rocks retain warmth longer when they are shifted. The team traced the warm ones like breadcrumb markers. A few hundred yards ahead, a drag mark cut through the soil. Not long, not deep, but clear. Someone had stumbled or been yanked forward. The width matched a boot. The spacing matched her stride. She had resisted again. The team did not say it out loud, but the detail fueled them. Resistance meant life. Life meant time. Time meant urgency. They moved faster through the narrow corridor between 2 ridges, careful not to disturb the ground more than necessary. The terrain opened into a flat stretch where the truck had clearly paused. The dust pattern showed a wide turn, followed by a sudden stop. 2 sets of footprints circled the vehicle. Someone had paced. Someone else had knelt near the side door. The indentation in the ground suggested they dropped something heavy. Maybe her. Maybe gear. A small metal shard lay half buried in dirt. It came from a cheap toolbox hinge. The kind criminals use because they do not expect precision to matter. That detail helped the team narrow the profile of who they were dealing with. Sloppy. Rushed. Poor equipment. Likely working on borrowed time. They followed the trail farther until the footprints thinned out and the ground grew too packed to hold impressions. Here they switched from visual tracking to environmental cues. A faint scent of gasoline. Fresh scrape marks on tree bark where the vehicle had squeezed through. A subtle change in dust texture, stirred by recent movement. They used lights angled low to reveal every contour. Even the smallest ripple in the soil could guide them. And it did. The dust shimmered unevenly in one section, meaning the truck had accelerated there. Acceleration meant confidence or final approach. They pressed forward until they reached a clearing that felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. The brush pattern showed recent trampling, but the center of the clearing was untouched. That suggested the vehicle passed straight through without stopping. The trail exiting the clearing was sharp and direct. The path no longer drifted or wavered. Whoever drove the truck had made a choice. A final direction. A straight line rarely meant escape. It usually meant destination. The team knew they were closing in, and every shift in the ground confirmed they were on the true tactical path that would eventually lead them to her. She forced her mind to stay awake even as her body begged to slip away. The darkness pressed in harder with each minute, soft at the edges but heavy at the center, like it wanted to fold itself around her and pull her under. Her breaths were shallow now, controlled only because she ordered them to be. Every inhale tasted old. Every exhale felt like giving something up. She knew the danger better than most. In a space this tight, unconsciousness was not a pause. It was a countdown. Her pulse thudded behind her ears, too fast for the air she had left. She pressed the back of her head into the wood to steady herself, but the pressure made the dirt above her shift, sending a thin shower of dust across her cheek. She closed her eyes, not from fear, but to conserve strength. Vision wasted energy. Small movements wasted oxygen. She stripped everything down to the basics. Breathing, thinking, assessing. She had no room for anything else. Her training had drilled in the difference between panic and survival. Panic was loud. Survival was quiet. Panic burned oxygen through fear. Survival used it for strategy. So she talked herself back from the edge with deliberate calm, counting in her head, grounding her thoughts in small tasks she could control. She flexed her fingers, one joint at a time, to keep blood flowing. She timed each breath to the rhythm she set. She ignored the instinct to gasp for more air. She knew gasping would only speed the loss of what little she had. The coffin was closing in on her mind as much as her body. The walls felt closer every minute, shrinking as her chest tightened. It would have been so easy to give in, to let her thoughts drift into the haze building behind her eyes. But she refused to surrender the one thing she still controlled: consciousness. As long as she was awake, she could think. As long as she could think, she had a chance. She slowed her breathing further, bringing it down to a pace that felt unnatural at first. Her lungs protested, desperate for more, but she ignored the urge. She focused on the small details inside the coffin. The grain of the wood under her fingertips, the rough texture where the boards met, the faint vibration of shifting dirt. All of it kept her anchored in the present. Anchored meant alive. Alive meant someone could still reach her. Her chest rose in tiny increments, barely enough to qualify as breath. She could hear the rasp of her own air scraping in and out, a thin thread of sound in the silent box. She tried to swallow, but her throat was too dry. The soil had stolen all moisture from her lips and tongue. She tasted grit every time she breathed. Her head throbbed from the strain of holding herself together, but she pushed through the fog creeping into her thoughts. Images of the outside world slipped into her mind, uninvited but strong. The sky, sun on her shoulders, wind moving through leaves, voices she trusted. She grabbed hold of the one thing that mattered in those flashes, the certainty that the seals were looking for her. She focused on that until the fear in her chest loosened enough for her to breathe without trembling. She could not afford hope in a soft sense. She needed purpose. Purpose kept her awake. Her body fought her. Muscles twitched from the lack of oxygen. Her vision pulsed behind her closed eyelids. A buzzing sensation spread down her arms. She rubbed her fingertips against the wood to stay alert. She shifted her shoulders just enough to keep circulation moving. Each tiny movement felt like lifting a weight. Her breaths hitched, but she forced them steady again. She tried the lid once more, not to escape, but to measure it. Her palms pressed up. Nothing. The wood held. The dirt held. But the attempt gave her information. Knowing what she could not do mattered as much as knowing what she could. She let her hands drop back to her chest and refocused on her breathing. She could feel her heartbeat slowing now, settling into the deliberate rhythm she worked so hard to maintain. Her mind wandered for a moment, drifting toward the edge of sleep, but she snapped it back with a sharp thought. Sleep meant death here. She pictured the team again, tracking her, connecting clues she had left behind. She pictured their precision, their discipline, their refusal to quit. That image was enough to keep her eyes open in the dark, even though there was nothing to see. Her breaths grew thinner, but her will stayed sharp. She kept counting in her head, keeping time with the faint thump of her heartbeat, fighting to stay conscious long enough for them to reach her. The final push began when the trail tightened into a single direction with no more branching paths to sort through. The team had been tracking for hours, and every clue pointed them toward a point in the terrain where the earth dipped and thick brush swallowed the light. They moved as a unit, silent and steady, each member reading a different layer of the environment. One listened for movement. One scanned for heat. One watched for ground disturbance. It was not speed that defined their advance, but precision, the kind that turns minutes into lifelines. As they closed in, the signs changed. The footprints that had been scattered earlier became clustered, tighter, as if the men who took her had stopped arguing and started working with grim purpose. The spacing between the impressions told its own story. Someone had walked in short, tense steps. Another had stood in one place long enough to grind a deep groove into the dirt. That meant they had reached whatever location they chose as the burial site. The team knew they were within the last stretch, the place where mistakes from the captors would be most visible. The ground began to shift under their boots. The soil was looser here, churned in patches where no natural pattern explained it. One of the seals crouched and sifted a handful through his fingers. The texture was wrong for the surrounding terrain. It was recently disturbed, fresh, moved by force, not weather. There were small clumps still holding the shape of a shovel blade. That detail hit hard. Burials are messy if rushed, and rushed was exactly what this looked like. They spread out in a wedge formation, widening the search radius without losing cohesion. The forest around them felt still, almost too still, but they trusted the evidence more than their instincts. A broken root, a trail of displaced stones, a shoeprint half buried by a careless kick of soil. All of it pointed toward the center of the clearing. One of the team members signaled a halt, then knelt, placing his palm flat against the ground. He felt the faintest difference in compression. The topsoil lacked density. Something had been dug up and refilled. The others gathered without a sound. They studied the ground with a level of focus that comes only when time is razor thin. One pointed out the collapsed air pockets in the soil. Another noted the angle of the refilled dirt, slightly mounded instead of level. The pattern formed a rectangle. Not wide, not long. A size meant for one person. The kind of grave someone digs fast, under pressure, expecting no one will ever find it. They did not waste a moment. They marked the perimeter and started clearing the top layer by hand to avoid collapsing the cavity below. Every scoop of soil was lifted with restraint, not fear, but respect for the space they were dealing with. They communicated in hand signals, short and direct. One watched the terrain for any sign of returning threats. Another monitored the structural stability of the ground. Two dug with speed at the edges, freeing the soil without putting weight on the center. The deeper they went, the more obvious the truth became. The dirt changed color, shifting from the natural tone of the forest floor to the darker shade of freshly turned earth. Then the first piece of wood emerged, pale and rough where it met the soil. It was a lid, not professionally built, hammered together from mismatched boards. The team exchanged a single look, tight with resolve. This was it. They cleared more soil, working fast but controlled. Dirt spilled into the cracks between the boards. One seal brushed it aside and pressed his ear close, listening for anything inside. A heartbeat, a breath, a scrape. Even silence mattered because silence meant they still had a chance to intervene before the last of the oxygen was gone. They signaled for extraction gear, but they did not wait for it to arrive. Time was the enemy, not the tools. Two of them positioned their hands at the corners of the lid. Another stabilized the ground to prevent collapse. They pried at the seams with deliberate force, feeling the wood flex as they leveraged it against the packed soil. The boards groaned. A crack appeared, thin but widening as they worked in synchronization. Air rushed down into the opening the moment the first board lifted. It was cold, sharp, and swallowed by the dark space below. They widened the gap until they could see inside. The light caught the shape of her face, still and dusted with soil, eyes closed but features tense from the effort of staying alive long enough for this moment. They checked for breath, not with panic, but with the calm urgency that defined their training. Every second mattered, and they moved with the kind of focus built for moments when life hung by a thread and precision mattered more than speed. Loyalty showed itself long before anyone spoke a word. It lived in the way the team moved as one, how each man read the others without sound, how not a single step or decision was made with hesitation. Their commitment to her was not a matter of duty. It ran deeper. SEALs operated with an unspoken pact that if one of them disappeared, the rest would tear apart the earth until they brought that person home. That kind of bond came from training, but it also came from shared hardship, shared missions, and the understanding that survival often depended on trust more than anything else. In this moment, loyalty became something physical, something visible, something sharp-edged enough to cut through fear and doubt. Grit was what filled the space between each breath as they worked. It pushed them through exhaustion, through heat, through the strain of tracking clues that grew faint as the hours stretched on. Each time the trail thinned, grit kept them from slowing. It kept them sharp when most people would start making mistakes. It kept their minds steady when the stakes rose with every step. The determination in their movements came from an internal push, a promise made long before this moment, a refusal to accept loss even as the window for saving her grew smaller. When they pulled her from the ground, grit showed in the discipline with which they handled her. No panic, no rush, just trained urgency. They cleared her mouth and nose of soil with practiced hands. They tilted her head just enough to open her airway. One monitored her pulse, while another checked her breathing. Someone else steadied the ground as they lifted her free. Their faces stayed focused, not because they lacked emotion, but because their emotion sharpened their actions rather than distracting from them. She was barely conscious, drifting in and out like someone caught between two worlds. The cold air hit her lungs and made her gasp, the first real breath she had taken in hours. Her fingers twitched. Her chest rose. Those were small signs to anyone else, but to the team, they were signals of a battle won. She had held on long enough for them to reach her. She had fought with every ounce she had. She had trusted they would come. That trust was not misplaced. They wrapped her in a thermal blanket and carried her with precision, guarding her body as if it were the most fragile thing on earth. One stayed by her side, keeping contact to let her know she was not alone. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a weak rasp. They did not ask her to explain. They did not ask her to stay awake or hold on. They did what SEALs do. They made her safety their priority, and everything else could wait. As they moved her through the forest, the path they had taken on the way and looked different. Now it was a route out, a lifeline instead of a puzzle. They followed their own markers, retracing the trail with the same precision, but with a new layer of purpose. The terrain shifted around them, branches breaking under their boots as they moved quickly but carefully, avoiding anything that might jolt her or restrict her breathing. Their formation tightened, a shield around her. Loyalty in motion. At the extraction point, the helicopter blades cut through the air in a rhythmic thrum. They loaded her aboard with the same level of coordination they had shown on the ground. One of the medics moved in, taking over with smooth confidence, but the team did not step back far. They stayed close, watching every monitor, every rise of her chest, every flicker of her eyelids. It was not habit. It was instinct. Once you fight for someone, you do not detach easily. She stirred more as the flight lifted into the sky, the vibration running through the metal frame of the aircraft. She looked at them with eyes still heavy, but there was clarity in the way she tracked their faces. She recognized them. She understood she was safe. Even in her weakened state, she saw the truth in their expressions. They had not simply found her. They had refused to leave without her, no matter how long it took or how faint the trail became. The rescue said something simple and powerful about who they were. Loyalty was not a word to them. It was action. Grit was not a trait. It was a choice they made every hour of that search. And when they carried her out of the forest and into the open air, retrieving her from the grave someone else dug, they proved that a seal does not abandon their own, and that even in the darkest places, they move with the certainty that they will find the way back to each other.